my name's Lane Baker, and for my honors contract for this class, I was tasked with reading the entirety of Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation and then just kind of analyzing it based on our course readings throughout the semester. I had already read the book before, and when I was about 15, it was kind of the reason I went vegetarian, so I was really interested in reanalyzing all of the points that Schlosser makes in his different chapters. What I found mostly was that he doesn't really include any sort of like identity politics or identity analysis or intersectional analysis, really of any of the people that he talks about throughout the entirety of his book. The first notion of him doing this I saw was in chapter 2. It's called Your Trusted Friends. Schlosser talks about basically how fast food companies will market to children in schools. He talks about how schools actually don't have a lot of funding, which is why they accept the advertising from fast food companies on the sides of buses and in cafeterias and things like this. The way he presents it in the sense that essentially like every school could have this problem. So he talks about a specific school in Colorado where this happens, and he just basically says that due to insufficient funding this happens, but doesn't really say that not every school might face this problem of insufficient funding. And when in reality, when we look at it based on our text throughout the semester, most of the schools that are going to have the problems with insufficient funding are going to be in low-income areas. And the people that do live in low-income areas and go to school in low-income areas are going to be people of color. So like Black populations and Latina populations. So in our block at all reading that talks about like fast food and its implications with like gender and race and class and things like that, as well as the Gottlieb and Joshi food justice text in chapter 3. They both talk about that low-income areas are going to be where we see the most of, obesity and food injustice and food insecurity, because there are so many food deserts and because there are so many fast food restaurants and because there is such a extreme lack of grocery stores. So he doesn't mention this in Fast Food Nation, but in reality, based on our course text, we can say that only these low-income Black and Latino populations are going to be dealing with fast food marketing to children in schools because of the way that fast food locations and grocery stores and income distribution actually exists in the real world. In reality, white schools really aren't going to have that big of a problem with funding distribution as like schools and communities of color would. So that was my first thing. The second thing that I found was in chapter 3 in Behind the Counter. So in Behind the Counter, Eric Schlosser is mostly just talking about the people that actually work at fast food restaurants. So he mainly targets teens in this, which is pretty intuitive, I guess, because a lot of teens do work at fast food restaurants. But I think that in our course readings, we've definitely learned that like a lot of women work in fast food restaurants, a lot of adults in general, but also a lot of women, a lot of people of color that are also adults do work in fast food restaurants, and that experience is different based on the gender and the race and the class of that person, not just teenagers work at fast food restaurants. So he does mention really briefly that people of color and immigrants often do have to work at fast food jobs because they basically, based on their identity, they have to deal with working long hour and low paying positions, and fast food restaurants are pretty much the number one provider of those jobs. So we see in our Allen and Sachs reading that 77% of women work in fast food jobs, I think that data is from like 2001, so that might be a little bit outdated, but I can't imagine it's changed too much. That's not something that he mentions at all in this. He's mostly just talking about teenagers working, which I think is a really big missed opportunity, because if he's going to be talking about the experience of people that are working in fast food restaurants and he doesn't include those gendered experiences, then he's not, I think, giving a totally accurate picture of what that looks like. Like I said before, he does kind of mention that even teens that are like upper middle class and are white don't necessarily have to spend as much time at these jobs or work these jobs at all. But I think he misses out on a really big chunk of analysis in terms of talking about the gendered experiences that women face, and then the fact that people of color and immigrants often have to work these jobs, and it's hard for them to unionize. They prey on the fact that they can't speak English, and that those are going to be the jobs for communities of color and immigrants because they're living in the spaces where fast food restaurants are all around them. The next chapter where I noticed something was on the range. It's not as big of a critique as I have with like the previous chapters, but he discusses a rancher named Hank that commits suicide due to the encroachment of big agribusiness and like fast food based agribusiness coming in and taking away his business because he can no longer provide for his family. I think that what he's talking about and the implications that he's talking about are very important, and I wouldn't definitely say that he shouldn't include this because it's obviously very serious, but what he does leave out is the position of people of color and of women in the global food system, and the suicide rates that they face, especially with people outside of the United States, like communities in India and farming communities in India where the suicide rate is very high, and then as well as like the experiences that may cause women even in the United States to want to commit suicide if they're working in agribusiness. The Green Motel reading that we read talks about how women face sexual assault and violence, especially women of color when they're working in this industry, and that could obviously be a driving factor to a suicide. And I think that while it might not have been the point that Slosher was trying to make, he brings up this topic, and I think that to have a better, more comprehensive argument, he should include these topics as well. And then finally, the two chapters that we had to read, so they were Cogs in the Machine and The Most Dangerous Job. We already did kind of have to analyze those pieces, or we had the opportunity to at least with our papers. But those were also two big chapters where I think that he didn't very adequately include analysis that is intersectional or analysis that included race and class. He does mention in the chapter, in all fairness, that a lot of the people that are working these jobs that are very dangerous who have the opportunity to get injured are people of color. But I do think that he mostly focuses on men, and what we've learned in several of our readings, I think it was the Allen and Sachs reading again, where we talk about how women definitely do face danger in their job, and they are a big portion of the food production industry. So while he does do a good job of talking about the dangers that people of color face when they're working in these production areas, I think that he misses an opportunity where he doesn't fully talk about the experience that women have in these food production areas. I will wrap it up since it's getting a little bit long, but those are my kind of main points of contention, or at least areas that I think he missed out on analyzing further. I don't necessarily think that the points that he missed make the book totally defunct or like not worth reading, but I do think that he kind of has this more white American male version of the problems with fast food, and because of that, it's not exactly the best text to be reading when looking at food justice or the total problems within a global fast food system.